Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Wright, for coming. I appreciate it, seeing you today. I want to ask some questions about transmission and the grid. In your first secretarial order, you committed to use all lawful authorities to strengthen the grid, including the backbone of our transmission system. Since 2005, FERC has had the authority to act as the sole permitting agency for large multi-state transmission lines that your department deems to be in the national interest, but the federal government has not once used this authority due to litigation and endless bureaucracy regarding DOE's role in the process. That's Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden never used the authority. The backstop permitting authority for transmission is also a fraction of the authority that FERC has long had over natural gas pipelines and LNG, which always get their one-stop permitting shop at FERC. So my question is, would you support bipartisan efforts in Congress to streamline this permit authority for large transmission lines, including would you be supportive of establishing permitting parity at FERC between natural gas and transmission?
Welcome back to Conservative Perspectives, where we cut through the noise and give you the truth about what's really happening in Washington. Today, we're diving into a fascinating exchange from a recent congressional hearing on energy policy that perfectly illustrates the challenges facing American energy independence. If you appreciate real analysis without the mainstream media spin, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that puts America first.
Absolutely. The United States needs to build more energy infrastructure of all kinds, and certainly including transmission lines.
Okay. And I agree with my colleagues that we're walking into a reliability and affordability crisis. And I think to the extent that's because right now our grid is planned in a way that's segmented, costly, and inefficient. The various regions across the country have no incentive to work together or ensure that we're meeting load growth in the most efficient and cost-effective way. Last year, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, released a study showing that an additional 35 gigawatts of interregional transfer capacity, which are grid connections among regions, would make the grid more resilient against extreme weather, with lower costs, and enable us to meet load growth. The study also says that building interregional transmission maximizes the use of energy resources, including peaker plants like natural gas, by enabling regions to send power where it's abundant to where it's most needed. Do you agree with the results of that study, and what can you do with the department to help build more interregional transmission infrastructure and use DOE authorities to build more interregional transmission?
Look, so I can't speak to the specifics in that study. I do read a lot about this, studies, but I can't comment on that one. But yeah, are we better off with more?
Sometimes known as the SEAM study. You might have heard it that way.
Yeah. Look, there's no doubt that our country and our grid would benefit from more transmission. And it is a subject of active study and discussion at the DOE. The problem, as you know, the historical record of building transmission is just deathly long, incredibly hard. NEPA and environmental protests have made it more than a decade to build anything. Very frustrating. We're working on that. We'd love to get that faster. And in the meantime, we're also working on things to take existing right-of-ways and either have dynamic rating on lines. They have a certain maximum power they can put through, but it depends on temperature and wind speed.
Don't disagree with any of that. I think, actually, I'm working on NEPA right now myself because I agree with you. But the issue I'm raising is the lack of incentive among regions to cooperate with each other to build transmission that I think undisputedly would make our system more reliable and offer lower costs for consumers. And what I would love to get is the opportunity to work with you, get your commitment that that's something you want to do, and that you would work with us on a bipartisan approach to getting that done.
Would love to work with you. Would love to. And you're right, not just in the interregional transmission, but there's a lot of just the wrong incentives in our electricity grid because of the regulatory environment. So I look forward to working with you in a bipartisan basis to figure out how to make electricity easier to move and cheaper to buy.
All right, and also I think we have some different understanding of the facts of the production of energy. I just wanted to say the U.S. produced record oil and gas in 2023, more than we've ever produced before. We always thought it was an irony that we produced more oil and gas under Biden and more renewables than under Trump, and more renewables under Trump than we produced under Biden. And in fact, electricity production is up about 5% over the last 5 years. We know we got to do more electricity production. And the one thing I would just say, you mentioned a concern about investors losing their investment in energy because of a change in government policy and maybe the government should reimburse them. We're about to do just that. There's 100 gigawatts of energy lined up to get connected. About 90% of that is non-emitting, what we call clean energy. And they depend on these, many of the tax incentives that have been laid out in existing law. And I think the administration is proposing not to phase those out, but just to cut them off. And a lot of that energy won't be realized because of that. I assume you're not suggesting we pay those people for changing the law like you just said.
No, the subsidies for wind power, the
the
production.
gentleman's, he's out of time. If you do it in about 10 seconds, that'd be great.
Yeah. Those subsidies are decades old. We absolutely should get rid of them as soon as possible.
We're changing the law and hurting investors like you said you were concerned about.
It's removing subsidies. It's not preventing construction.
It's current law.
The gentleman's time has expired, and the chair now.
What we just witnessed is a perfect example of the bureaucratic stranglehold that's been choking American energy development for decades. Secretary Wright is absolutely correct when he points out that we have the authority to streamline transmission permitting, but we've never used it. Think about that for a moment. We've had this tool in our toolbox since 2005, under Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden, and nobody has had the courage to actually use it because they're terrified of litigation and environmental activists. This is exactly the kind of regulatory paralysis that has been holding back American energy dominance. While China is building infrastructure at breakneck speed, we're sitting here debating for over a decade just to build a single transmission line. The congressman is right to point out that we give natural gas pipelines one-stop shopping at FERC, but somehow transmission lines get tied up in endless red tape. This is backwards thinking that puts environmental extremists ahead of American energy security. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room that the congressman brought up. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation study showing we need 35 gigawatts of additional interregional transmission capacity. This isn't just about moving electricity around. This is about national security. When Texas had its winter storm crisis, or when California has rolling blackouts, that's what happens when you don't have a robust, interconnected grid. We need redundancy and resilience, not fragmented systems that leave Americans in the dark. Secretary Wright's response about dynamic rating and using existing right-of-ways is smart policy. We don't always need to build new transmission lines from scratch. We can make our existing infrastructure work harder and smarter. This is a kind of practical, results-oriented thinking we need more of in government. But we also can't let perfect be the enemy of good. While we're optimizing existing lines, we still need to build new capacity. The congressman's point about regional cooperation is crucial. Right now, our electricity grid is planned like a bunch of feudal kingdoms, each looking out for themselves instead of working together for the common good. This creates inefficiencies that ultimately cost consumers more money and make our grid less reliable. When regions can't share power efficiently, it means we're not maximizing our resources, and we're vulnerable to localized problems. Here's where I have to push back on the congressman's statistics, though. Yes, oil and gas production hit records under Biden, but that's despite his policies, not because of them. The Biden administration has been hostile to fossil fuel development from day one. They've canceled pipelines, restricted drilling on federal lands, and created regulatory uncertainty that has scared away investment. The production increases we've seen are largely due to private companies drilling on private land, particularly in the Permian Basin. The congressman also mentioned that 90% of the 2,600 gigawatts waiting to connect to the grid is so-called clean energy that depends on subsidies. This is exactly the problem. We're creating an artificial market distorted by government picking winners and losers. When Secretary Wright talks about getting rid of wind subsidies that are decades old, he's absolutely right. These subsidies were supposed to be temporary to help an infant industry get off the ground. Instead, they've created a permanent class of energy welfare recipients. The real issue here is that we're subsidizing unreliable energy sources while penalizing reliable ones. Wind and solar only work when the wind blows and the sun shines. They require backup power, usually from natural gas plants, but our policies make it harder to build that backup capacity. This is why Texas nearly had a complete grid collapse during the winter storm. We had plenty of wind turbines, but they froze up when we needed them most. What we need is an all-of-the-above energy strategy that prioritizes reliability and affordability over virtue signaling. That means nuclear power, which provides clean, reliable baseload power. That means natural gas, which is abundant, clean-burning, and reliable. That means coal with clean technology where it makes economic sense. And yes, it can include renewables where they're truly cost-effective without subsidies. The congressman's concern about investors losing money when policies change is valid. But here's the thing. When government creates artificial markets through subsidies and mandates, those markets are inherently unstable. Real investors understand policy risk. What we shouldn't do is guarantee returns on investments that only make sense because of government intervention. That's not capitalism. That's crony capitalism. Secretary Wright's approach of removing subsidies rather than preventing construction is exactly right. If renewable energy is truly cost competitive, it shouldn't need taxpayer support. If it's not cost competitive, then taxpayers shouldn't be forced to subsidize it. Let the market decide what energy sources make the most economic sense. The bigger picture here is that America has been blessed with abundant energy resources. We have more oil, gas, and coal than most countries could dream of. We have uranium for nuclear power. We have good wind and solar resources in many areas. What we don't have is a rational energy policy that maximizes these advantages. Instead, we have a patchwork of subsidies, mandates, and regulations that create artificial scarcity and drive up costs for working families. This congressional exchange shows that there are people in Washington who understand these issues and are willing to work across party lines to fix them. Secretary Wright's commitment to working with Congress on transmission policy is encouraging. The congressman's focus on practical solutions rather than ideological posturing is refreshing. This is the kind of pragmatic approach we need more of, but we also need to be realistic about the challenges. The environmental lobby has tremendous power in Washington, and they've shown they're willing to use lawfare to stop energy projects they don't like. The regulatory state has grown so complex that even well-intentioned reforms can get bogged down in bureaucracy. State and local governments often have their own agendas that conflict with national energy policy. That's why it's going to take sustained political will to make real progress. We need leadership that's willing to take on the special interests and put American energy security first. We need to streamline permitting processes, eliminate unnecessary regulations, and create a level playing field where all energy sources compete on their merits. The stakes couldn't be higher. Energy is the foundation of our economy and our national security. When energy is expensive and unreliable, everything else suffers. Manufacturing becomes less competitive. Families struggle to pay their bills. Our military's operational readiness is compromised. Our geopolitical adversaries gain leverage over us. China understands this, which is why they're building coal plants and nuclear reactors while selling us solar panels and wind turbines. Russia understands this, which is why they've used energy as a weapon against Europe. We need to understand it too and act accordingly. The good news is that America has everything we need to achieve true energy independence and dominance. We have the resources, the technology, and the know-how. What we need now is the political will to unleash American energy and stop letting environmental extremists and foreign adversaries dictate our energy policy. This congressional hearing gives me hope that there are still adults in the room who understand these issues and are willing to work on real solutions. Let's hold them accountable and make sure they follow through on their commitments. American energy security is too important to leave to chance. That's my take on this important energy policy discussion. What do you think? Are you ready to support real energy independence? Or are you content to let bureaucrats and environmental activists keep America dependent on foreign energy? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Conservative Perspectives for more unfiltered analysis of the issues that matter most to America's future.